This is the Nomad Futurist Podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabil.
Well, hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is Nabil Mahmood calling in from Hawaii.
Philip Coates from Brooklyn, New York. Yeah. Who's got better weather now, David?
Yeah. Well, Atlanta, Georgia. Good to be with you guys.
David, thank you for joining us. Great to see you be a part of the Nomad Futurist. So let's get started. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how do you play in the data center space?
All right. Well, I work for a large REIT called QTS. And, probably like a lot of people my age, I didn't start off in the data center business. I sort of accidentally ended up in the IT business. And I learned, I got into gaming of all things, started building my own computers. I didn't want to have anything to do with computers. My dad was a manager for IBM on the space shuttle. My brother was in the IT aerospace business, other members of my family. I didn't want anything to do with it, but I ended up there and ended up working at the University of Texas, did that for about 8 years. And then in 2004, I ended up going to work for what eventually became QTS on the IT side, and then in the colocation and data center space. And for a number of years, till 2018, I was either in solution engineering or director of solution engineers or something related to that. And our chief revenue officer came to me in 2018 and said, and our CTO, and said, hey, look, we're trying to expand what we're doing. We would love to have somebody who's an evangelist that knows, the industry, has done this for a long time, and is not necessarily an evangelist specifically about QTS products and services, but just our industry. What do you like? What's interesting? And would you consider doing that? And first I thought they were punking me. I was like, so are you asking me, would I like to travel around the country? Give me a microphone. Nobody's going to judge my single lines. Nobody's going to give me a hard time about the accuracy of my solution. And I get to talk to other knuckleheads and argue about my opinion? Yeah, something like that. I'm in. So easy decision. And so I've been doing that since, exactly 2 years, since May of 2018. So that's kind of a circular way of how I got here, but that's what I'm doing now.
So was 2018 the first time you and I met in New York when we were on the same panel?
Yeah, it was. And it was, that was the panel we did at the district attorney's office or something like that. I can't remember. Got a little nervous going in there. I didn't know what the statute of limitations were for some of my crimes, so I needed to do like some quick internet searches before I went in. But and they made me a moderator. They let me get at the podium. I couldn't believe it. It was pretty awesome.
I assume it was the first time a panelist was not given the opportunity to speak.
That's a little harsh. No, we let everybody speak.
One thing that I wanted to say, so when Nabil and I were fantasizing about potentially co-hosting a podcast, the one picture that I had in my head was having a podcast and having David McCall on it.
Oh, thank you.
So, and really the basis for it, and we discussed this a little bit last week, was the idea that we wanted to provide a forum for interesting people to evangelize, which is apparently your bread and butter these days, about our industry, so that we showed them that this is a place where interesting people with interesting experiences come and try to make critical infrastructure sexy again. And who could I possibly call upon to show the sexiness of this industry than David McCall? So
we're in trouble.
Yeah, I wonder if you had any thoughts on, you would say to younger people thinking of career paths and whether critical infrastructure is right for them or not.
Well, I would expand it beyond critical infrastructure and just say the data center industry. And there are only a few industries that are showing amazing growth in the world right now. And I think that, my perspective is sort of my line of reasoning is there is no idea on earth that doesn't live in a data center. For example, the formula for Coca-Cola Used to be written down on a piece of paper in a safe. It's in somebody's data center today. Their data center, Amazon's, yours, mine, somebody's data center. Well, if that's true, if the ideas of the world live in a data center, then that makes data centers some of the most valuable real estate on earth. And if you think of, I know all three of us have talked about this many times in the past, that the commodity of the whole world is data, right? We've had this discussion where sure, some of Netflix's value is the content they make that we watch when we watch Ozark or Stranger Things or whatever. But the real value to their shareholders is the data that they're creating and that they can monetize and whatever. And so regardless of your industry, whether you're in the legal industry, you're in critical infrastructure, you're an electrician, you're a developer, you're a security person, you want to be tied to the commodity of the whole world. So why wouldn't you want to be part of, directly or indirectly, the world that we're part of, whether you're an evangelist in that world or you're helping to make the legal agreements or you're supporting the IT infrastructure? If it were me, I would want to be one of the world's commodities, and this certainly is one of the biggest.
Is there a unique skill set that you've developed? Your story is phenomenal. All of us didn't go to college for data center education.
Right.
We kind of blended into it in a lot of ways. So is there a unique skill set that you've developed over the years that's led to where you're at today?
Hard-headedness, does that count? Or obnoxiousness? I think like one of the things I think that serves us well is one, we're curious. We're curious people. I'm curious about how things work. I'm not really a gadget person, but I am curious. And I think you just have to be, our world's changing so fast, so often. It's these two paradigms to me. One is you're going to have to adapt a lot. There's going to be a lot of failure. There's going to be a lot of change. And so, you got to be able to ride through a fear of failure and just keep trying and changing and doing. And I don't mean like infrastructure, like the data centers collapse. Like we've perfected the art of maintaining critical infrastructure, having operational maturity and excellence so that the systems are up. They stay operational through weather events or pandemics or whatever. But in terms of growing, as the world's adjusting and changing, case in point right now, we're going through this pandemic. How do you operate a data center remotely, keep it up, service your clients, et cetera? So you've got to have the ability to be curious, not have a fear of failure, and just be able to pursue solving problems, really being a problem solver. And I think that if you have those things, it serves you well in our business. I mean, my journey was IT and figuring out how, I was the first guy who could get the fax machine working. So all of a sudden I was the network administrator. And just like a lot of us, right? Google was our friend. We figured out how to do it. And that's kind of been the key to my career. And I'm sure to some degree y'all's as well. And whether that's critical infrastructure, you said you go to school and you get your mechanical or electrical degree, and then you come apply it in our business. And you learn some from school, but you've got to apply it and adjust as we continue to be agile. The most sophisticated buyers in the world right now, the 5 largest companies, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, they're coming to our companies and they're buying services from us and they're pressing our designs. So we have to constantly be adroit in our designs, how we service our customers, where we expand to geographically, how we operate our business. And if you like solving problems and you're curious about that, I think this is the best industry in the world to be in.
Yeah, I believe you kind of nailed it on the head. I believe it's more than just education. It's more of a persona or personality of a person whereby you need to have an open mindset, somebody that's willing to learn and evolve as technology changes. I was asked the other day about what I'd really do for a living in a lot of ways. And it's basically like building SimCity or playing Legos. Right. And it's having a mindset that there's a constant evolution in what we do and how do you build on it, have it be a continuous growth. So you made a great statement earlier regarding data centers working by themselves. COVID-19 is a perfect example of stretching those boundaries because we have not had a plan of business continuity. And it's not been a plan whereby we've actually put it to test to this degree. So we're actually really stretching the capabilities of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So earlier you said that we are in a position to do this, whereby we can run infrastructures remotely. In your experience, what is that boundary? I mean, is it 30 days that we can have nobody go in the data center and everything is fine? Is it 60 days? Is it 90 days? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Because you have to have preventive maintenance for equipment, critical equipment that's sitting in the data center. So what are you guys doing? What are you guys seeing in that space? And what, in your opinion, is a potential resolution to make sure that we sustain this environment? Because we don't know how long this is going to last.
Right. I spent some time in the military, and a lot of the people that we hire in our organization, like a lot of organizations, we have a lot of Navy nuke people, a lot of ex-military people. And one of the things we've learned, just like the military does, is that there are, you have to have operational maturity and operational excellence. So you got to have standard operating procedures, methods of procedure, emergency operating procedures, and then you build, the FBI calls them concentric zones of security, but it's the same idea with operations. And that is, what's the minimal staff needed to continue the mission, right? That's all of our, there's two things, kind of the Marines say this, I think the best, but all military units have this: accomplish the mission, protect the troops. Those are your two things. You got to accomplish the mission, you got to protect the troops. And probably all great philosophies have some version of that. And so in our case, we do have physical, mechanical, electrical infrastructure. We do have physical boundaries. So we do need security personnel, are the right physical people coming and going from the site. Do we have the right physical parameter, and is it being manned? And, do we have integrity around that? Our operational excellence in terms of operating the critical infrastructure. Mechanical devices are spinning, electrical devices are transmitting, but we have continuously, this is not new to us, for 15 years that we've been in business and bring a lot of excellence to the question: how do we make sure we have the right level of redundancy, not just in the gear, but in the people, the right standards, the right methodology, the right emergency procedures to operate at regular levels, minimal levels, extended levels, because we prep for, I'm sure you guys do as well, chemical spills, inclement weather events, et cetera. Now, did any of us plan for a sustained multi-month national, not just geographic, pandemic? We might have thought about it, but there's no way to model it. So we feel pretty good in that we do have personnel in there. We are following all of, like everybody else, the CDC guidelines for personal protection. We've added that to our regular operational excellence. But some of the things that we've done is we have spent the last 4 or 5 years really hardening how do we do all the things remote that we can do remote. So help desk, remote tickets, emergency response where you don't have to have a physical responder there. You've got somebody on Zoom or WebEx or one of the other connectivity platforms. And we all had already been drilling and planning on those things for many, many years. And so we've put those in place and then continue to evolve them. You do have to have, it's the nature of our beast, a physical presence. So we've got that. And then we've got a bench that we can call on, and we rotate people in to make sure everybody stays healthy. And we've got the ability, because our designs are so similar, to rotate people in geographic regions if we need to do that. And that's how we're doing it now, and that's how we're evolving it.
What's so interesting about the world we find ourselves in now is trying to determine what the permanence of some of these changes are going to be. You guys are in a unique position that, you've tried to automate all these things and build AI into your platforms and really forward thinkers in that regard. And I think so many other industries, so many other companies are now going to try to determine whether this becomes the baseline. It becomes incumbent upon organizations across vertical to essentially be managed remotely. And those companies that were reticent to embrace, remote workforces and whatnot, are going to have to evolve, or they're going to have to kind of go away. And there's going to be this, almost industrial revolution of, remote work, where it seems like the traditional office environment, the traditional type of ways in which businesses have been done for the last, 20 or 30 years is going to be significantly disrupted, not just until this pandemic is over, but, for the foreseeable future, if not forever.
I think so. And I think it's a good thing. I mean, the three of us have talked many times over the years and with our peers and even the people that we disagree with, which is a shocker that anybody would disagree with me. But what's the business case for 5G? How are we going to really solve who's going to fund it? How 5G is going to work within buildings? How do we really not just hype it, and use it for user experiences at stadiums or whatever, but really get in. Here's a fantastic way that's going to happen. Joe, we talk about, we've spent, as I said, many, many years, and in our industry, we spent many years on how do we manage these systems remote. That's not our biggest challenge right now. What we're really focusing on is, because we feel like we are well down that path. We've got machine learning going on already. We already have AI. We have analytics already built into our platform that our CTO got deployed 4.5 years ago. And we've had thousands of minor and hundreds of major releases on that. So we feel good there. And we're going to keep iterating on that. We've got 50, 60 some odd developers on that project, and we're a REIT. Because we knew, not about a pandemic, but this is the future on how do we augment our staff to operate our sites like this. But the real key, I think, that people are going to be talking about is how do you have remote workforce and maintain your culture? The key to QTS and most businesses, Apple, whoever, back in the day that made them so successful, wasn't just the elegance of the product, it was the culture of their people. And I'm employee number 32 at my company. I love this company. It's the longest I've ever worked. There have been a lot of changes, but it's the culture that we have amongst ourselves. And so that's what we want to make sure as we do distance work or whatever, that we are a cohesive unit. We maintain that cohesiveness, whether you're on the business side, selling deals or putting opportunities together, you're on the management side, you're on the infrastructure side, you're on the legal side. We laugh a lot. We're very serious about what we do, but we have a strong DNA in our organization. And that's what I think organizations are going to be really trying to figure out. And the healthy ones are going to be those that can keep their culture, because working remote just makes sense. Here in Atlanta, our traffic is terrible. You can drive downtown and drive all over the place now. We've just solved a lot of the congestion problems. So if we could continue to enhance this but maintain culture, I think that's going to be the difference. And those companies, it's not just deploying tools that can't maintain their culture. Their people are going to get picked off because people want to be part of a community. It's not just what they do, it's who they do it with. And if they don't feel like they're part of a community that's making a difference, they won't stay.
That's a great point. The way it was done in the past and with the generation prior to us, it was bums in the seat and you can tell people and dictate in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. This is democratizing the workspace, and the leaders that are going to be the change agents and that are the ones that are able to inspire people and motivate people and, to your point, develop and retain that culture are the ones that are going to be successful. The companies that are not able to do so are going to fall off the sky very quickly here.
Yeah. But think of how thrilling it is, though. If you want to live in the suburb where you live now, but there's a business opportunity that, in another part of the world or another part of the country, but you can really immerse yourself into it. You're not just an occasional call in some meeting, but we have multiple meetings every day, just like this, virtual meetings. We laugh, we're slacking or, using our tools with each other all the time. We're getting serious business done. We're having a fantastic quarter at our organization. But if I can live in, I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, let's say, and I want to work in LA, or I want to work here in New York City, but I get an opportunity. I think this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for us. But again, people are going to want to stick to not just where there's a job, but where there's a culture. And so that's on the organization to figure out how we project and maintain that while we attract workers from the whole world.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with management styles and a recognition that culture is important. You think about, to expand on your point, you think about how different industries are going to change and how doctors never really, depending on what we search for pediatricians, just like we search for schools, for our kids. And there were a significant minority of doctors that embraced telemedicine or doing anything, over FaceTime or email or any of those things. They only wanted to work within the office. And the same with our kids' school. You see the difference between the schools and how they're dealing with remote learning and e-learning. And you take those two things into account, and a recognition that, people that lived in a particular region, in a particular city within a state or a particular county within an area just had access to, better doctors or better schools or whatever. And the idea that now the best pediatrician that's, let's say, in New York City can have theoretically patients from all over the country, all over the world, where you would typically have thought that something like a pandemic where everyone was retreating into their own homes would make the world feel impossibly large because everyone was so separated. There's this feeling of we're actually close to each other. I can touch Nabil in Kona just by moving my finger a couple of inches. I can be in Atlanta, where I understand the bowling alleys are going to open in a couple of days, and hang out with David. It's incredible.
It is incredible, but I think you still have to get permission from Nabil before you and I already have an understanding, but before you poke him, make sure he's in agreement.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I have to make sure to check all my.
You got to ask permission.
No question.
So, David, what is your definition of a data center?
I actually got schooled by Gary Connolly, not in a bad way, in a great way, a few months ago. He's the CEO of Host in Ireland. If you haven't had the pleasure of his company, he is one of my favorite people. And he said that he learned, to separate data from center, right? And that he as he explained it to me, I don't know if you guys know Phil Lawson-Shanks. Phil is a good friend of mine and also an evangelist. It's where I believe Gary learned this, but he helped me to sort of understand it. So you've got the center part, which is the physical infrastructure. It's it's the walls, it's the IT stack in there. And then you've got the data component of it, which is, in my space, as I think about data centers, I just think that's where data lives. And traditionally, when we called those, data centers started off first for the federal government. I think the term first got coined in the 60s for the Census Bureau. But anyway, over time, it's come to mean colocation, which is where a third-party a company puts their gear in somebody's third-party infrastructure that they don't own, universities, private enterprise, et cetera. And that was sort of the definition forever. And now we have all of these terms of the micro data center, the edge data center, the core data center. But in my world, that's where either data resides, so it's hosted there. So at QTS, I would call us primarily a core data center, although we're the edge for somebody. And that's where big hyperscales and large enterprise organizations host their streaming data, their gaming data, their enterprise data, their e-commerce data, or whatever. And folks connect to it and interact with that data. And there are emerging, whether we call them edge or micro or other data centers, where the transaction is taking place much closer, much further down the stream with folks than, at a core data center like ours. We're going to be in an NFL city. We're going to be a very, very large data center, as opposed to some of the smaller ones that are going in the rural. So for us, it's a data center is that conglomeration of infrastructure, staff, connectivity. One of the things that hopefully we can get to it on this call that I'm really interested in, that I'm spending a lot of time, is sort of the connectivity backbone. Forever, I've been interested in the critical infrastructure backbone, but now I'm interested in where we're going with connectivity because it's so fascinating to me. How do you make the data center, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you had 3 or 4 carriers in your facility, that was more than enough. Now, if you don't have an exchange with at least a dozen or more of the largest and dark fiber and quickly connected to the area carrier hotels, if in fact you're not a carrier hotel, with other carriers that can do software-defined networking, a lot of people wouldn't consider you a data center. That term's changed over time. And I believe that probably in the next 5 or 7 years, if you're not connected to satellite infrastructure, if you're not, if you don't have an earth pad or some of these other things, people are going to look at you differently. So it's an evolving term. But right now for me, it's where data lives and data transactions transpire.
Yeah, that's a great definition. It actually simplifies it a lot of ways. It could be an IDF, it could be MDF, it could be a bunch of servers in my garage, and that's a data center in layman terms.
Yeah. Microsoft just deployed one 2018, I want to say, in the ocean off the coast of California. And they're trying to use tidal energy to help power. They're using the ocean to help cool. And you've got the data centers in Europe that are hosting the data for the, as they're splitting atoms. These are purpose-built, very specific, the data center could be the body or could be the organ in the body, or, connected by the capillaries and the arteries and the nerving. I mean, it's all intertwined. I think probably sooner than we expect, it's going to be a large mesh globally, for good or ill, of all of these interconnected sites much more dynamically than they are now.
So you mentioned connectivity. What are your thoughts on connectivity? Where are we headed? What do we need? What's next in that world?
It's almost overwhelming, really. Recently, in fact, we're going to be doing a podcast here in the not too distant future on low Earth orbit satellites, whether they're the little cube boxes or microsatellites, or the higher geosynchronous orbits satellites. Interestingly enough, one of the things that's sort of shifting, so you've got the business side and then you've got the performance side. So satellites have become relatively speaking, so inexpensive to make, to launch, to put into orbit. The performance has gotten so good. Again, we're not talking about competing with, a direct fiber connection in your local metro area, but we're looking at organizations that are deploying constellations, whether they're global constellations or statewide constellations or constellations out in the Pacific Ocean, on how do we bring connectivity to the rest of the world. Do it well. And so as I see how these organizations are solving these problems, just from low Earth orbits, then you've got Google and their Loon project. One of the really interesting things to me about the Google Loon projects is they're using these essentially weather balloons, modified weather balloons that are running these orbits. They created an AI that let the weather balloon figure out what's its best pattern. And so now we're getting all this AI data on as the machine's figuring out what the weather patterns are better than the people on the ground and making adjustments. And so now we get all this benefit of the AI. You've got Elon Musk with his proposal with Starlink. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. The jury's still out. But all these folks trying to get connectivity up. And even satellite data that says I can't get a packet through satellites faster from New York to Chicago, but I can get it faster from New York to Singapore. And we can, because of the way that packet, light travels at the true speed of light in space, as opposed to down on the planet where it runs through interference. And so if the distance is great enough, going up, over, and down is more efficient. So you've got all of that. And then you've got sort of the things you've got to be concerned about. How do we secure it? We've got a physical pandemic going on right now with the virus impacting us physically. Well, what happens the more and more connected we get globally to a virtual virus, right? 70% of the world's powered by Cisco right now. It's the number that I've heard, at least in the West. Well, what happens if something happens to that code? I love me some Cisco. This is an anti-Cisco. It just says that we could be vulnerable. And so what do we do there? And then how do we distribute smaller, more regional way connectivity now? So much of the United States, for example, still on 4G or doesn't even have 4G. So those are the areas that are really, really interesting and curious to me. And then lastly, our internet's still pretty vulnerable. When we build data centers, we don't have any single points of failure. The internet, if you take out 2 or 3 carrier hotels in the New York City metro area, or a couple other key places in the United States and globally, you're going to take out a significant portion of connectivity for that geographic region. So all of those areas, positive and at risk, are interesting to me.
Yeah, it's scary in a lot of ways. You mentioned a couple of very interesting points, and I want to hear your take on this. There have been rumors creating these controversies that 5G has been the root cause of coronavirus. Well, could you add on to it? I mean, it would be very beneficial for our users to kind of have an understanding of what 5G really is. What does bandwidth mean and latency mean in the world of computing that we live in today?
So I'm gonna start with the first part of your point, which is about the conspiracy, and then talk a little bit about the technology proper. Just by the nature of who my friends are and people that I associate with, it's not uncommon to have some conspiracies turn out to be true, right? Whether they're for whatever reason. But it seems to me that in order to pull off a conspiracy of that size, you'd have to have a huge segment of the technology world kind of be in on it. Yeah, we all know that that's what happened, but nobody's saying anything. And there are so many people that have contrarian interests that if that conspiracy, if there was real evidence for it, that it would get shredded. We're so quick to run to social media and news outlets and whatever and say, hey, look, I know something that's being portrayed as true that's not true. So right now, I'm not giving a lot of weight to those conspiracies. But here to me is a benefit, without getting into the technical details of 5G. Just imagine if you could take, for example, right now today, I just watched last weekend or the weekend before a NASCAR race, a virtual NASCAR race on TV with 40 drivers racing around this track in real time on one of the major television stations. They're broadcasting all of this. 15, 20 years ago, I know because I ran land tournaments, you couldn't do that. And now you literally feel like you're in the cockpit. If you're the driver, if you're the spectator, you feel like it's a sport. And that's just from that generation to now. With 5G, the fifth generation, imagine when we have 100 plus times the capacity. And it will be lumpy at first. Like there's, you don't just lean your 5G solution against the problem and it automatically solves it, because, these networks, we still have to figure out how to get them to talk together. We still have to figure out how they're going to penetrate inside buildings. But one of the things I heard really interesting was Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. I want to say it was this time last year, said, look, 20 years from now, we want Apple to be known as a healthcare company. And if we're not, will be very disappointing. I think what he meant was all the wearables that people will be able to wear, how they'll be able to help human thriving and flourishing by having wearables that will help you with your health. Well, the only way that's really going to work is that your system's doing EKG and real-time monitoring your health with the systems that can do that, is if you have greater bandwidth. If the EMT pulls up at a car wreck and can do a hologram off of bandwidth to get the physician there to help them triage what's happening, to save your child or to help intervene or whatever, we're going to do that with greater bandwidth. So I think as we work to solve the problem of getting bandwidth rolled out, getting the infrastructure built out, the benefits of 5G are so going to outweigh the risks that we're not even going to think about it. For example, we get on airplanes a lot. When we invented the airplane, we also invented the airplane crash, right? It happens, and we build system after system after system to prevent that from happening. It does still happen, but we still get on airplanes. And we can argue that the benefit that airplane and air travel and soon space travel brings to human beings is almost incalculable. So we don't stop, we just build better systems. And I think that's what we're going to do with 5G. There is a risk by connecting the world and bringing bandwidth, but it's going to let us build smart cities. It's going to let us build so many great things for ourselves that it's far and away going to outstrip, I think, the inherent risks that it's going to bring as well.
When you look at all these science fiction movies, it presents a dark vision, a dark future.
Sure.
So what I got out of it is like that you're very optimistic. There's going to be a lot of good things that are going to happen with it.
Look, we all agree we have to guard against the devil inside, right? I mean, human beings, some of the most educated human beings on earth, we still participate in genocide. We still attack other human beings that we deem as other. We use technology to do that, and we have that in all of the human experience. Do I think we're at risk from robots taking over the world or... No, not really. I don't. First of all, general AI, I think, is far away, which is, sort of the iRobot thing, as opposed to narrow AI, which is how do I get a specific piece of equipment or tool or whatever to make human-like decisions, right? To be able to infer things and make decisions like a human being, but in a very specific, narrow way. I still believe, as my friend Melvin Greer said, that the most powerful tool on the planet is the human brain. But as we build systems, there's no doubt there's risk. I mean, that airplane that I talked about before, 20 years ago, people flew them into buildings in New York City and around the world and shocked the world. So they took a tool that's just a tool and they used it for evil in a very, specific way. But we didn't cancel plane flight. We just changed how we manage it. And I think that's the same way. Will there be things that happen in the future with the technologies we make? Sure, we'll guard against them. But the benefit of that technology coming and having that database evaluate 400,000 or 40 million MRI scans to help get what is today a fatal and incurable brain disease removed from somebody's head. Like, if that's your son or daughter or your loved one, is it going to be worth it? Even though it could be used, in a inappropriate way at some point in the future. Yeah. So I would say I'm guardedly optimistic, but I'm also, a realist. Facts on the ground are sometimes tools are used against us. We just need to manage through it.
This is really inspiring. I want to know, like, what gets your juices flowing? What's the latest tech that you're looking at? What's the next big thing that's inspiring you? I mean, is it like autonomous vehicles? Is it? I mean, of course, you talk about bandwidth and latency.
Yeah.
What's like, on a personal note, what's exciting for David McCall?
Man, there's so many cool things. I mean, I'm less interested in autonomous cars. I want autonomous drones. I want to be able to walk out the door, presuming I'm going anywhere, get in my drone, and it's an app, get on it and have it take me somewhere. Although at my size, evidently, there's a weight limit. I got to figure out how we're going to solve that. But autonomous drones, I think those are really cool. I mean, those are an article I'm researching now. One of my interests are gaming in general, but esports in particular. And people have been talking about this for a while, but the infrastructure needed to support the esport world, you can get, there's scholarships out there. There are I just read an article this morning, that said in 2018, Novak Djokovic when he won Wimbledon, I'm pretty sure it was 2018, won like almost $3 million. A 5-man esports team won a tournament that year, and they divided up $11 million. Wait, what? What am I doing? But to see the infrastructure that's got to support that, kind of back to what we were talking about at the beginning with data centers, right? To support the infrastructure, to support, because while the tournaments are generally held, especially those big tournaments, they're on a LAN, they're not online, but the streaming of them is. A lot of the participation is, they may have 20,000 people in attendance, but they have 15 million people watching that. What other sport, baseball, football, basketball, cricket, soccer, whatever, is getting that kind of draw? Maybe the Super Bowl, a game. And so that's very interesting to me. And how are we going to build the infrastructure for that? I don't want to, because there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that are interesting to me, and they're all related back to connectivity and the infrastructure needed to support, move, protect data gravity, which we haven't talked about. Data weight. Well, what are we going to do with that when data sets get so big? You have to move the applications and services to them because you can't move them. It's too much data to move across the wire. All of it. But it's just really cool time.
Yeah, exciting times.
You know what? I love listening to you guys speak so much. I could do this all day. It strikes me as interesting, the fact that there are so many different areas that can be impacted. You take 5G as an example. Once you have that type of bandwidth to your device, and you no longer have that limitation there, then again, like you mentioned, it could be good or for bad, but the good certainly outweighs the bad. But there are so many things you mentioned. There are so many different initiatives out there. You mentioned reading an article this morning. Where is it that you go? Where do you get your information from? Where do you get your itches scratched?
Well, it depends. I mean, one of my favorite, related to our industry, one of my favorite places to go is Data Center Frontier. I know you guys know Rich Miller. Sure. He's got a great staff of people that write for him. I was just reading the other day stuff from earlier in 2019 about robotics and farming and whatever. So whether he writes it or he brings in staff, they've written about esports and a number of other things. So I go there a lot. I just do a lot of, there are people that I'm connected to on my LinkedIn profile, and I go to listen to, I mentioned Phil Lawson-Shanks earlier. He just did an article on data gravity. I spoke at PTC earlier this year on data gravity. So I go to the tech blogs. I don't know that I have one in particular. And I just want to hear what my peers are talking about, because they're curious people and they want to know I want to know what they're curious about and what is it that they find fascinating. I go to, some of the bigger, like I go to the NASA sites, I go to various national science and institutions, MIT. What are they researching on? Here locally, I go to Georgia Tech. What are they looking at to solve the problems of thermodynamics and heat transfer in the data center? That's on the critical side. But I also want to know what they're doing with game theory and how they're applying it to analytics. There's a guy I'll be doing a podcast with, a professor. His name is Brett Myers up at Villanova. And he is a professor on data analytics, but he's also a consultant for the Columbus Crew and how they're going to use analytics for, one, to teach people how to use analytics, but also how are we using it in sport, everything from recruiting to training to performance in the game. So my mind is kind of all over the place. There are a few go-to things that I go to for the industry and my peers that I follow. And then I just go out in the world and I get interested in topics and I just start searching. The interwebs seems to work pretty good for me.
So, you're obviously, you're a cockeyed optimist when it comes to what's coming down the pipe. You're also a father. I mean, what do you think the next generation needs to look out for? I mean, what is it that we as parents in a world where these kids have grown up literally from birth with a device in their hand? I'm old enough to remember the fact that a smartphone was invented. My kids, I try to explain to them that there was a time before these things. I know there was a video going around last year where they put like a 12 or 15-year-old in a room and videoed them trying to make a phone call with a rotary phone. Right. And it lasted like 15 minutes and they couldn't do it. They simply couldn't do it. So what are your thoughts on that? I'd love to get the David McCall perspective on the next generation.
Wow. I don't know if it's worth anything. Here's been my experience. I have 3 daughters, and they were all probably 15 or 16 as they turned 15 or 16 before they got their first phones and devices. But for me with them, and just in general, I love the benefits that the devices bring. So if if they're driving, if they're traveling, if they're at sports, if they're doing after school, whatever, and I need them to be able to connect with me, or I need to be able to connect with them, or, hey, a couple of them work part-time jobs where they're going to college. Can you pick this up at the store or whatever? So they bring so many great benefits. At the same time, there are a few things we've had to teach them. That's not your diary. That online device is not your diary. And so be careful. People my age, if you made a mistake or you wanted to, as I used to say in a movie I saw, change your stars, you moved. You decided, you know what, I don't want to be that person anymore. And I don't mean for nefarious reasons. I mean, we were allowed to make our mistakes usually pretty privately. Mm-hmm. And say, man, I don't like that character that I displayed, or I just don't want to be that person anymore. Well, if you're posting online, as we see celebrities, a joke they told 15 years ago in a different context as a comedian in a different way is now brought out today, and we're going to measure it by today's context and try to hold people accountable. And so I try to remind them, don't get too personal with that. Number one. Number two, I don't think we're very far away, and probably some industry is already doing this, that are going to start scrubbing social media and social content on who and what and how you post to see if we want to hire you. And it's less about your education, and it's more about, do these posts seem to indicate to us that Phil's going to be the kind of personality that says the customer is always right? Look at these rants, or look at this whatever. And that's normal for us as human beings. But if you post it out there, now you got to sort of defend yourself against something from, oh no, I was, that was then, this is now. And lastly, it's so easy. We've seen this so many times in the last 5 years, for at least that it's been to come to my attention, how we demonize people, how we demonize ideas, how we rally around a particular thing, not in a positive way, but in a negative way. And we're really, really quick to, something gets posted and we think that must be true because my fill in the blank, my parent, my celebrity, my whatever posted it, even if they rushed to post it before they had all the facts, and the whole world condemns that person. Back to what we were talking about in the beginning with culture, I think there's an opportunity that if you just see people as this little screen, this little box on the screen, and not as real people, it's so easy. And we have to guard ourselves against demonizing people. There are bad ideas. There are ideas that probably aren't particularly valuable. But in my opinion, human beings are very valuable. And technology, I think, can lend itself to, if you're distilling human beings down to their, little tweet or their whatever, that there's a temptation then to treat them as less than people. That's the one thing that we caution about. Until you understand them, don't hop on and, behave boorishly.
It's an amazing point, and I think that there are all these terms thrown out, keyboard warrior or whatever, and trying to make sure that we're instilling in our children this idea that whoever you're talking to, whether it's on a device or whether it's on the phone or whether you're typing to them, is an actual human being, and you should interact with them as though they were in front of you. I think the more we get to this new kind of remote interaction world, which is it's obviously moving in that direction a little bit faster than maybe we thought it would have with this pandemic, it's going to be more important to keep that up. What a great point.
Yeah, lead with love. I mean, that sounds silly, I know, and I'm not a pacifist, but I think if we lead with love, and that's not to say don't confront. I encourage my kids, look, if you need to confront an idea or a person, do it, but first make sure you got the facts. And generally speaking, do it privately first. That starts off better. But anyway, like the main thing we've tried to teach them is anything you post out there is going to be forever. And you and I did not have that our first 18 or 20 years. Right. At least I didn't. And so I was able to, do some pretty foolish things, and I don't have a record of it. At least it's been fun that the state assures me by now.
For those who have met your wife, she shares all of those stories in that first meeting. So everyone gets up to speed on those first 18 years quickly.
Yeah, she terrifies me. She's half Japanese and half Irish, so I have to toe the line.
Amazing.
So David, what advice would you give someone that's wanting to enter into our space?
Into the data center space or into my shed? If it's my shed, step carefully because it's a mess. Man, I just think probably like anything, man, embrace it with a sense of adventure. This is one of the most interesting times, and there's scariness out. 15, 20 million people have lost their job as of this conversation. There's all kinds of things going on in the world. I acknowledge it, and nobody is immune from paying attention to that. But in our industry, the data center or the connectivity or the technology business, if you think about it, we don't even make forklifts anymore. We make technology and software that's deployed through forklifts. We don't make doorbells anymore. We make technology and software that's deployed through doorbells. Be part of that industry. And that doorbell goes back to a call center. It goes back to a data center. That data, that information goes somewhere. And people need to make the legal agreements for it, or they need to make the blockchain smart contracts, or they need to make the security protocols, or they need to make the infrastructure that, some of the infrastructure is highly redundant. Other infrastructure is very lean and fast. Just embrace it. Follow the areas that are you're naturally inquisitive of, whatever that particular area is, but let it lead you into our industry, and you'll be part of the commodity of the future. I just think that's the wise thing to do, but just embrace it, recognize it's going to change. My career, your careers, I'm sure, have changed a number of times in this space. But man, there's no better place to be.
That's great. So what do you wish you had known when you started out? Would you have done anything different? Or would you have taken a different route?
I'd have bought Amazon in 1997. I would have done. Or Yahoo or whatever. I think I would have been less fearful. It's so easy now in my 50s to talk about this. I still have fearful moments, but to embrace the idea of just letting my curiosity take me. What's my natural aptitudes combined with an attitude that I'm describing? Where could it take me? I'm a public speaker in the data center business, and you guys are as well, or you're among other things. I would just, for myself, encourage, man, just embrace it and buy Amazon.
All right, he must be related to Bezos. What do you think are some of the positive impacts post-COVID-19?
Wow, I think there's a lot of them. One, I'm not sure how it's going to happen, but I think the whole world is going to embrace building out the infrastructure necessary to connect our businesses so that we can do remote business where it makes sense. I think for sure. I think it's bringing to light the risk of, not related to the data center business, but just, we've outsourced a lot of things, and maybe not everything should be outsourced. I love the Chinese people. I'm not anti-China or Chinese or India or any of those things, but there's a risk, just like in the data center business. If you put all of your investment in a vendor, if you put all of your investment in a single supply chain, if that's disrupted, how do you recover? And so I think that one of the positives that we're going to come out from that, this could have been a solar flare EMP, and there's all kinds of things that could have caused us. Staying out of the politics, I just think we're going to have to reevaluate, how do we build supply chains that are more robust? How do we build infrastructure that's more robust? I think that's going to be hugely positive. The connectivity acceleration that's going to happen, I think, is going to be hugely positive. It's also, there are a lot of people in my industry that are not out of a job, and there are other industries that are. And I think it's going to cause people to say, I may be a world-class builder, but if I'm building infrastructures that nobody wants built right now, because they're more of a luxury item than a core infrastructure item like a data center, that's part of our strategic advantage as a nation, not just business, I think we'll start attracting more and more excellence from other industries into our industry. I think all of those will be, and I could go on, but that's a good start.
Well, so putting politics aside, how do we address the supply chain? Is COVID-19 an opportunity for us to start bringing a lot of this outsourced work that we had moved to China, India, Russia, and other countries? Is it an opportunity for us to start manufacturing locally within the U.S. and having more control over systems, applications, and the infrastructure? Is that the direction that we should lead into?
Yes, 100% yes. However, here's the big asterisk. One, I think in my business, like I said in the beginning, we deal with some of the largest buyers on earth. And I believe that most very large organizations are going to want to know, what's your supply chain look like? Whatever it is, in whatever way. And if you've got all of your, one of the great things about China and India is they have the largest and second largest, I believe, workforces on earth. And there's an economy of scale, and there's so many advantages, but it also comes with risk. And so what do we do? Do we put, how much do we have within our borders that makes sense? And how much do we have outside of our borders? I don't know what that exact formula is, but I think the economics from our customers are going to drive all of us in all industry to figuring that out, including in those countries, to figuring that out. The second thing is, the risk is if we don't, our governments will. That's the single biggest risk to our industry, to any industry, is regulation, far and away. And I'm not anti-regulation, but we've seen that so many times where the government, in response to strategic interests or whatever, they come in and they bring regulation. And now we all got to figure out how we deal with that. I think that if we solve the problem for ourselves first, that is a much better way to do it, with partnership of our customers, than having governments around the world, attempt to solve it for us. We want as little, we want to solve the problem first, minimize supply chain risk, and be prepared strategically, because data centers are strategic, and it's not just commerce. We are a strategic part of any national government, and we want to make sure that we can keep them operational, staffed, operational, supplied, repaired. So we're going to need to solve these problems. Our organization's working on that right now. I'm sure many are, to get ahead of the curve before state, local, and national agencies begin imposing regulations on top of us.
Is there any conversation with a data center guy that does not end with, the answer is hybrid? The answer is, trying to determine how much of that stuff you can maintain yourself, with the ability to leverage, other resources when necessary, and provide effective accountability for your customers, for your services, and not put all your eggs in one basket. So,
Phil, I feel like you're setting me up, because every conversation we have ends with, where's the buffet? Every single one.
What a perfect, if we had to find a tagline for this particular podcast, where's the buffet? We found it. It's found it.
David, thank you very much. It has been great. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
My great pleasure. You know, I love you too. In spite of your both very best efforts to give me a hard time, I think very highly of you. Thank you for letting me come on today.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we'll all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. I'm confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.com.